ask a few questions and then wait for the responses. And mostly what I'd like to do is pick up on a few of the points that folks like Barney Frank and John LaFalce and Maxine Waters and Jack Metcalf made, and just maybe carry it a step further and maybe add 1 or 2 points from Bernie Sanders as well. Point number 1. General Suharto is a corrupt dictator who, among other things, happens to be worth some $30 billion. He has a habit of putting in jail political opponents of his, including leaders of the trade union movement who have the strange idea that workers have a right to organize and stand up and fight for their rights. Mukhtar Pakpahan, who is the leader of the Indonesian free trade union movement, is now rotting in jail. Several years ago, Barney Frank and I passed legislation which said that the United States must demand from recipient countries in IMF deals that they guarantee internationally recognized workers' rights. The Treasury Department has not done that. You have not obeyed the law. So, Mr. Rubin, I'm giving you the opportunity now to tell General Suharto that the people of the United States will not sit back and participate in loans to a corrupt dictatorship unless leaders in their country who are fighting for democracy and for workers' rights are set free. Tell the world now that no more IMF money goes to that country, no goes to Suharto. Tell the people of Indonesia that we are on their side. Free Mr. Pakpahan. Tell General Suharto that's what you're going to do. That's question number 1. Number 2, picking up on a point that Mr. LaFalce made a little while ago. Generally speaking and historically, when businesses and large banks make bad loans, when they screw up, when they invest where they shouldn't have invested, and the people they lend the money to can't pay it back, what historically happens is people sit down and then the banks write off some of it, they forgive some of it. That's the way it goes. I find it ironic that it is the taxpayers of this country who are going to have to bail out banks that have made billions and billions of dollars investing in Asia, huge profits. I find it ironic that IMF austerity programs are not going to affect General Suharto, who's worth $30 billion. He's got his money abroad, but it's going to affect the poor people of Asia who are going to see higher unemployment and lower wages. So I would suggest that maybe instead of coming to the people of the United States for a handout, why don't you get Chase Manhattan Bank and General Suharto in a room and help them negotiate so that these guys can take responsibility for their own bad business practices rather than the middle class and the working families of this country. Third point, picking up on a point that Ms. Waters made, New York Times today. It says, a study done by the banks about what happened in Asia. It shows how, quote, how foreign banks, including American banks, fell over themselves to lend more money year after year in Asia. I agree with Ms. Waters. In my state of Vermont, we have mayors, we have the governor who are down on their hands and knees asking corporations and banks to reinvest in our country. Workers today in this country are earning substantially less in real wages than they did 20 years ago, working longer hours. Women have got to work rather than stay home with the kids. What are you doing to get these banks and corporations to reinvest in the United States of America, pay workers here a decent wage, rather than investing in Indonesia where they pay people 20 cents an hour? So that's the point that Ms. Waters make. I think it's an excellent point. Last point, Mr. Metcalf touched on this point. The IMF historically does not have a good record in terms of the poor people of various countries. You mentioned Mexico, Mr. Summers, in your pride that Mexico repaid their loan and we got a big interest rate back. Boy, we made money. Do you know what's going on in Mexico today? Do you know that working people have seen a significant decline in their wages? They got millions of kids who are working for no money at all, and you're sitting here telling us how proud you are we made money. So the suffering children and the unemployed workers of Mexico have paid us back, and we're gloating about it. Some of us think that maybe the function of the IMF or the United States government should have picked up the poor people of the world, not push them down further. I would appreciate a response to those questions.
Let me try to go through some of them, if I may, Congressman Sanders. In terms of Indonesia, this administration has an exceedingly strong commitment to human rights. The Secretary of State has rearticulated that commitment in all sorts of fora, and as you know, has had a personal history of being deeply committed to these issues. As you also know, it is very complicated and difficult to accomplish the purposes that we would all have in that respect. Now, wait a minute, I'll respond to your question. I think it is overwhelmingly in the interest of the Indonesian people and overwhelmingly in the interest of Indonesian workers and overwhelmingly in the interest of American workers to have an IMF program that prevents Indonesia from dissolving into financial instability, and that is what we are about in Indonesia. Separately from that track, because I do not think we can accomplish the purpose that you very correctly say should be accomplished on this track, very substantial efforts have been made, predominantly through the State Department, to try to accomplish the purpose that you've raised. Question on, I apologize, I can't read my writing. The workers of these countries bearing the costs of this. I think these countries basically face two possible tracks. One is that they put in place reform programs, they go through a difficult period, because inevitably they will, and then they come back out and they get back into a mode of growth. And if you look at these Asian countries, they have had remarkable rates of growth over the last, say, 20 or 30 years. And with all of the problems that exist in these countries, the average incomes and standards of living in these countries have increased very substantially as a result thereof. The other possibility is that these problems not be addressed, the confidence not return, in which case the workers of those countries, and also our own workers, but the workers of those countries will be vastly worse off than they would be if, in fact, reform and stability are accomplished. On the questions of inner cities, I guess my answer would be the same to you as it was to Congresswoman Waters. I totally and completely agree with the importance of the problems of the inner cities with respect to all of us. And I think we actually have accomplished a lot in this administration, but I have no question that there's room to continue focusing and try to do everything more that we possibly can do. And I think that we are committed to doing that. I may have missed something, but those are the ones that
But once again, I gather you're not telling General Suharto to free the leader of the union movement who is rotting in jail now, despite the fact that our law requires us to do that. You're not saying that.
I could repeat what I'm
You're not saying that.
I am sticking with what I just said.
Right. Well, I'm sure the people of Indonesia do not appreciate that.
Well, you know, it's interesting, Congressman Sanders. I think there are very serious issues with respect to human rights in many places, and I agree with the fervor with which you deal with them. The people of Indonesia are going to be vastly worse off if we can't, working with the international community, help Indonesia solve the problem that they now face.
People of Indonesia have the right to stand up and fight for their rights, and their leader is in jail now, and you are tolerating that situation. I
certainly agree they have a right to stand up and fight for their rights, and I think inappropriately jailing people, and I actually don't want to comment on the particular situation, inappropriately jailing people is something that is most reprehensible, and we view with the greatest concern.
But we are giving him billions of dollars and not asking him to free his political prisoners.
Well, we have not actually, just a matter of fact, the United States has not dispersed a nickel to Indonesia. The IMF has dispersed some funds, and we're trying to accomplish in what we can within the context of an IMF program. I think you've got another issue which I think, which has gotten enormous attention. I understand that Secretary of State and other State Department have raised this in many fora with the Indonesians. I don't think you can effectively accomplish that in this context.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, will ask a series of questions, and then you can answer in order. One, there's been a lot of discussion about the impact of the Asian financial problems on the U.S. economy, employment, growth, corporate profits.